Welcome to today's webinar, Marketo Lead Nurturing 101 Data Selection and Transition Roles. So I'm your host, James Fletcher, CEO and Marketo Solutions Architect over here at JTF Marketing. And today we're going to cover a few areas around transition roles for engagement programs in Marketo, selecting the data initially to go into your nurture campaigns. Secondly, talking about getting people between streams, moving them along that process, and importantly, pulling people out. So that is very important. We'll also look at Q&A right at the end. So any questions that you've got, use the Q&A function on Zoom at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be more than happy to chip in some of those questions a bit later on. So for those of you who don't know JTF Marketing, we've been around for 7 years. We help a range of companies across multiple industries and use cases use Marketo better. Our focus is really about expanding the capability of your team to maximize the investment that you've made within Marketo as a platform. So you'll probably see some familiar names on the screen, and there's many others. And again, it's across every industry. We see that Marketo fits a range of use cases from complex sales to very simple sales, of course. And there's many ways in which you can use, especially engagement programs, to enrich that process. So this is a webinar series. This is the second out of the 5 in this series. So if you haven't caught the first one, please do go back and watch it on the website. Go to jtfmarketing.co/resources, and you'll find the design webinar there available to watch on demand, or feel free to share it with any of your colleagues. Today, we're going to talk about data selection and roles, and then over the next couple of weeks, we'll focus on content, mapping that content out, building and testing your nurturing. So how do we get that right? How do we scale it? How do we make sure that we've checked the process before we go live? And then the final piece, how do we report and optimize on what works and what doesn't work? And that's obviously the critical piece of keeping your evolution in place when it comes to engagement programs. So let's hop back in, and just as a recap, as part of the conversation we had around design, we talked about revenue models, why revenue models are critical for engagement programs. Why? Just as a recap, we use this as a foundational step of data movement throughout the customer journey, right? This is a visualization of understanding of my 300,000 records in my database. Where do they exist? Where are they within the funnel, inverted commas? Are they known people who aren't engaging? Are they even valid email addresses? Or are they right down the other end of the funnel, buying stuff or asking for demos? And how do we measure and manage that? Of course, using a revenue model within Marketo is driven by data points in a lot of cases. Depending on how you've built yours, it may be different. If you haven't built one, there is another webinar actually on demand in our resources section, which I can recommend you to watch. Again, the transition between each one of these stages is based on data points when delivered through best practice. That means that actually when we start to layer in complexity on top of a revenue model based on revenue cycle changes, our lives can become a little bit easier. Now, we recommend building your engagement program on top of a revenue model for that very reason. It's going to keep everything super simple. It means all the rules and movement is controlled in one place. Again, when we talked about designing your objective, if you're building for conversion of existing data within your database, if you're tagging them with the right stages, the right messaging, is then easier to deliver to them as they move through that funnel. Now, we also talked about drawing it out before you build it out. So we're not even really touching Marketo at this point. We're thinking theoretical. What are we going to do? And we talked a little bit last time about what are the purpose of each one of our streams. And we've got this example diagram, which we build up over the course of this webinar series and give you some more insights. You'll see in red here, we've already got the objective. What we're going to do today is start to look at all of the possibilities and all of the ways in which data comes into our nurture programs, our engagement streams in Marketo. So let's start by thinking about that. I mean, how many opportunities do we have for data to come into those streams? Now, just for pure clarity, let's cover off what transition roles actually are. So transition roles are the control between each one of the stages And it's moving people out of the first stream into the second, out of the second into the third. So transition rules aren't bringing people into that specific stream, it's actually pushing them out to the next stream. And it's only in a positive journey. So we've got to make sure that we build rules for everything. And I'll come to that a bit later on in this process. So for those of you new to engagement programs, just remember, transition rules are about moving people to the next positive stage. Now, there's two kinds of transition rules for me. There's program transition rules, like the example that I've just shown on screen, that you'll build within the engagement program, and you'll be able to enrich your program using those rules. And they require a trigger to kick them off. They can also have additional filters, the same as your smart list. So you're going to say, data value changes or progression status changes, therefore do this. The filters then allow you to filter out the people you want to move forward, right? If it's a valid email address, if it's the right persona, etc., etc. And then what we're going to be doing here is only moving people between the streams. So remember that, only moving people between the streams within a program transition rule. Now, if we think about advanced transition rules, this is something slightly different. They can be trigger-based and they can also be batch-based, which is pretty important because program transition rules are only trigger-based. You cannot run them as batches. We'll also be able to handle more complex rules using advanced transition rules, and we'll be able to handle between which stream are we putting people into. How do we do slightly more advanced activity than we would be before? And we're going to build them as local assets within the engagement program itself. I've got a couple of examples at the end of this presentation, which I'll show you just to give you the clarity on which one is which. So I always get asked the same question. What data points should we use to move people between these different streams, right? So we've already designed our nurture. We've got high level thinking and objective of those streams. And now we're starting to think about, okay, so what moves someone from known to MQL or MQL to SAL? And it might be a range of things, right? As I said at the beginning, I like to put them down to revenue stages. It keeps it simple, it keeps my rules in a very straightforward, easy to manage process, which is someone is moving through my journey and I'm able to change the content on the fly and personalize that content based on the funnel stage. So if you're utilizing a revenue model, perfect, thumbs up for you. You're using it the right way. Now you can build your engagement program on top of it. Now, there are circumstances where you might want to use engagement levels or even lead scoring, right? So I'm not saying that they're not best practice to do. You just have to be very careful with them because you might end up with people rocketing their way through different engagement programs rather than staying in the right stream at the right moment in time. Again, you might choose to accelerate some or others based on additional metrics as well. And I would say they will be your advanced transition rules that you've got to think about. So if we start putting this into context and bring you back to our diagram, think about all the movement that you've got within an engagement program. So you've got movement between different streams. You've also got new data coming in. You've got existing data that you're going to pull in when you kick off your nurture program. You're going to have invalid records or preference changes kicking out people at any one of these given stages. So we've got to build all of this logic into our engagement program. Why is it not part of the default Marketo engagement program? I have no idea, because these are super, super critical rules, and it will help you keep a realistic view on the data that you have in each stream. And you'll get that famous question, right? Who's getting which content and when? How can I make sure that I'm communicating to everybody the content that's going to go out and the next step that's going to happen and how many people are active in one stream? Again, keeping the data clean is one of the important parts. So not only in the database, keeping the data clean, but in your program, as people change their statuses or we invalidate the records or we disqualify them, how do we bring them out and put them somewhere else? And that might be a recycle program, right? And we'll come back to that a bit later on. So let's focus primarily on the exclusion rules. So when we talk about exclusion rules, there's a couple of examples here I've written in red, just so that you can get a view of these. And again, we'll share these slides after this call. it might be that the data value changes for email status if you're verifying email addresses. And as it's invalid, we take it back out again. It might be that you're starting to think about disqualifying people based on their domain name. So is it a competitor? Is it someone we don't want to sell to? Is it a country we're restricted to selling to? Again, how do we start to pull people out of those streams based on the collection of data? And again, if we go back to the design of these streams, we're validating email addresses where we can, either through an email verification. Can you click here, confirm, it's opt-in, it's not. We're also collecting minimum data points. So we're trying to build engagement alongside building information about these people to make sure that we are collecting it, disqualifying, or qualifying. Again, we will then move people through the streams. Again, we talked a little bit about preference changes. So let's say someone opts out from your webinar program, therefore you've got to pull them out, or your general services nurture. Again, you've got to pull them out of that nurture stream to get a valid view of the data of who you're marketing to. Or even someone unsubscribes completely, right? First I was interested, now I'm not. Now take me out of everything or remove me from your database, whatever it might be. Again, controlling that data set. And then when we start thinking about further down the funnel, right? So again, we talked about this in the design phase as well, building rules surrounding what's going on for a customer. It might be they've got an open support ticket. Again, take them out of the engagement nurture in order not to bombard them with upsell, cross-sell. Again, from an SAL perspective, it might be that the lead's not right. So the revenue stage changes because the person's status has changed, or it's been disqualified, right? Let's take them out, let's recycle them, let's understand why, bring them back again. And you might have another engagement program that you take someone out of and then put them into a new one, right? So it might be a sorting program of some description. So if you want to get industry specific, persona specific, journey specific, or even language specific, you could go into another nurture campaign as well. So again, think about all those use cases when you're pulling data out and why you would pull them out. From a positive journey perspective, we then get a bunch of other rules, right? So again, we're looking at how do these data points align to the streams and the objective that I'm working to. Again, remember, we're always pushing someone to the next stream. So if I'm in the known stream, for example, and I've got the minimum data requirements and I've got an opt-in flag, then I'm going to push them into valid email. And then I might be validating the email address and understanding, great, someone's filled out a form, they're a brand new person, I've added them into my known stream, and now I'm going to move them on to the next stream in order to pick up that data set and make sure that I can communicate to them. You might then start pushing them along the journey and you'll get fills out web forms. So we're collecting more data about someone because we've engaged them in the right way. And maybe it's a webinar or a download where they're giving you more information. Maybe you're using progressive profiling to collect missing data points in order to push them through that journey as well. And again, get to what is the ideal MQL, right? How do I get all the information I need to say this is a marketing qualified lead? And then from a marketing qualified lead perspective, you're going to have a bunch of other kind of rules that you're going to put in place, right? So you're going to have data value changes to a meeting's been booked, or maybe you're going to have clicks on a link and requested a callback, or maybe you're going to have engagement scores reach a certain threshold, therefore throw them over the fence and get sales to follow up on them. Again, positive journey, again, from a sales accepted lead, we're going to be pushing people into maybe another stage. It might be SQL. We might take them out of nurture altogether, leave that communication in the control of our sales colleagues. Not always wise, but I'll let you figure that one out for your own business. Again, I think the more that we are focused on a standard process, a standard journey, understanding what makes a good lead, what makes a good opportunity, will then help us optimize this as we evolve over time. Now, if we start thinking about the examples of transition rules, so we've got a straightforward transition rule within the program. As you go and edit and you add in the rules, you'll have this option here. And you'll see this, I'm using the revenue stage as the example. I've got my model as my acquisition model. I've got my new stage as MQL, which means someone's moving between the stages. Now I can go and add in additional filters, of course. I might want to have a score threshold. I might want to have has data points just as an extra validation, just in case we're progressing someone through a bit faster than expected, I can go in and do that. Again, these are only positive movements pushing people through to the next stream. When we talk about those exclusion or even inclusion rules, right? So let's say we've got existing data set we want to bring into the nurture campaign. We will then go and select it using a batch campaign and say, anybody that looks like this, bring them into my campaign, put them in the first stream, etc., etc. Now, exclusion rules for this program, you can actually build as pretty much one campaign, right? Because you're using data value changes and your triggers. You're looking for email as invalid, you're looking for a preference change, you're looking for an unsubscribe, you're looking for escalation. It can be one program. You might feel more comfortable building these rules out to individual queries, and that's absolutely up to you. Again, just giving you some inspiration here. Under your flow step, of course, you're going to have remove from program, remove from engagement program, this program, etc., etc. You may also choose to have a progression status within your channel for engagement programs, where you're putting these disqualified people if you want to understand how many people have I disqualified during this journey. Now, the other thing I often get asked around data sets of engagement programs is how many people are in these programs, right? So you've got a couple of ways of doing this. You can build smart lists, which are driven specifically for your engagement program, and say, this is how many people are in this nurture, in this stage, etc., etc. I mean, for me, again, if I'm tying it back to my revenue model, should be in my revenue model anyway. I should have my standard smart list, my global smart list under the lead database where I'm pulling from anyway. But if you want to build them locally because it's industry specific or engagement program specific, again, build those local assets to measure that. Movement between stages is often quite complicated from streams. It is something you're just going to have to measure in a smart list, ultimately saying someone has changed between MQL and SAL, someone has changed to this within this time frame, and measure it, unfortunately, dare I say it, in a spreadsheet. That's the easiest way to do it, the most simplest way to do it. And again, we've got some templates we can share with you if you need some information on that. So how can we help you? And we've still got about 12, 13 minutes left. So if you get any questions, do fire them into the Q&A. And I'll pick those up in a second. Our certified experts have built many engagement programs, as I'm sure you know. We can help you design it in the right ways. We talked about the last week. We can also help you build these rules and tie in the revenue model to make sure that your life is easier as you move forward. And again, thinking data inclusion and exclusion, we can also help you test it and utilize the existing content you have within the business to make sure that you're not having this great job of building all this content and then distribute. And of course, supporting you every step of the way. Even if you've built something already, you need a second opinion, or you just want someone to verify that it's right before you launch it, we can definitely help you with that. So let's jump into the questions. So do let me know if you get any questions. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. As I say, this is a webinar series. So we've got another webinar in 2 weeks' time, focused on content. And then we'll get the following webinar. So head over to jdfmarketing.co/resources, and you'll find the list of our webinars there that we've done in the past and that are coming up. And then hopefully we'll see you on the next call.